what a joy it was to hear the kids saying their verses. And they focused on one of the words in one of the verses that we're going to look on today that I couldn't pronounce at their age, propitiation. And I was so happy to see how little Zoe just syllabize the word, just break it down, propitiation, so that she got it right. So it was a joy to hear that, and we want to just look into that a little bit more today in some detail. When we were here the last time, we looked at Romans chapter 3 from 1 to verse 20, and we focused on how Paul addresses it in a sense of a courtroom scene. And he presented the case that the whole world was guilty before God. No Jew, no Gentile, he said. There was no difference. And he presented it in the form of a verdict. Can you remember the three things? That was in the indictment. But we had the arraignment, we had the indictment, and we had the verdict. But in the indictment, it came in the form of character, who you are, in conversation, what you say, and in conduct, what you do. He presented the case. So from verse 10 of chapter 3 to verse 18, he presented the 13 charges that would go against the sinner. And he ended with the guilty verdict, which was universal. He said, there's none righteous, not even one. There's none who seeks after God. And so the guilty verdict was rendered on all of humanity. We also looked on the fact that in every case, you have to have a motive, right? And what was the motive of man to have fallen in that condition? Was because there was no fear of God before them. Man had no desire for God. They had no thought of seeking God. And so a summary verdict was rendered, meaning that the case was so strong, there was no need for a defense. There was no reason for a defense. So the judge would say, guilty. So that was the bad news. So it sounded a little bit sour the last time because, you know, the whole world is guilty before God, and so the verdict is rendered, and then the sentence will be passed out. And what is the sentence? The wages of sin is death. The soul that sins, dies. So the whole world has that over their heads. But then now we're going to turn to the good news from verse 21 today of Romans chapter 3. So could you turn to chapter 3 of Romans 4. And could someone read from verse 21? Stand up with clarity, please, and read from verse 21 to the end of the chapter. A young brother, preferably. From chapter 3, from verse 21. Any volunteers?
But now the righteousness of God without the law is manifest, being witnessed by the law and the prophets, even the righteousness of God which is by faith of Jesus Christ unto all and upon all them that believe, for there is no difference. For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, being justified freely by this grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, whom God hath set forth to be a propitiation through faith in his blood, to declare his righteousness for the remission of sins that are past through the forbearance of God. To declare, I say, at this time, his righteousness, that he might be just and the justifier of him which believeth in Jesus. Where is boasting then? It is excluded. By what law? Of works? Nay, but by the law of faith. Therefore we conclude that a man is justified by faith without the deeds of the law. Is he the God of the Jews only? Is he not also of the Gentiles? Yes, of the Gentiles also. Seeing it is one God which shall justify the circumcision by faith and uncircumcision through faith. Do we then make void the law through faith? God forbid, yea, we establish the law.
Thank you. And so Paul presented from verse 18 of chapter 1 to verse 20 of chapter 3 that the whole world is guilty before God. You can't stand before God on the basis of human effort. So you have to have an intervention. And that's what we have here in verse 21. We see the change. But now. But now is the interjection to show you that there is an intervention about what had just happened, what had just been presented. There's none righteous, there's no not one, there's none who seeks God, there's no understanding of God, there's no fear of God before their eyes. And verse 20 says what? It says that therefore by the deeds of the law no flesh will be justified in his sight, for the law is the knowledge of sin. And at the end of 19 it says that every mouth may be stopped and all the world may become guilty before God. So that's it. The world is guilty before God. But now, God always intervenes, dear ones. We look at Ephesians chapter 2 from verse 1 to 3 tells us who we were, dead in our trespasses and sins. And verse 4, we have the intervening God. But God, who is rich in mercy, with his great love with which he loved us. God always intervened on behalf of man. But what is he bringing here? What is the requirement of God? He requires what? The perfect righteousness of God. He requires perfection. But because we are guilty before God, and we have no standing before God, because the verdict is dead, how is that guilty plea going to be removed? How? We can on the basis of our effort. That's what he presented from chapter 1 to chapter 3. We can. So he had to introduce his righteousness. And that's what we have in this section. So he says, but now the righteousness of God apart from the law. That is so essential to this thought today. Because what was the law? It's a set of rules that said, do this or don't do that. Work this or work that. But the law could not bring man into a right standing before God. It was good. Matter of fact, it exposes the nothingness of man, if anything. But God introduces righteousness in his perfect Son. You know, many times when we focus on the work of the cross, we focus on it for what it has done for us. And rightfully so. We saw today, and in the verses, for God so loved the world, he gave his Son. Right? But the cross was more important to God. And that's what I want to focus on today. Because if we understand how important it was to God, we can appreciate how important it should be to us. What was the charge against God in the Old Testament? Where is your justice? That's what the Jews in Malachi's day said, Malachi 2:17. Where is your justice? You're supposed to be this holy, righteous God, yet still you have sinners out there going unpunished. How is that possible? How could you declare Abraham righteous and his sin was not atoned for? How could Noah be righteous and there was no payment for his sin? How is that possible? How is that possible? They didn't know what was to come because, you see, the cross, the church, and all these things was a mystery, right? And so all these things that happened in the Old Testament, they say that from Adam until the cross. Matter of fact, when you go down to the verse, what does it say here? It says that God in his forbearance passed over the sins that were previously committed. That's in verse 25. In the Old Testament, it says that God passed over their sins, but did he let their sin go unpunished? Absolutely not. He could not be righteous and allow that to happen. Their sins would have been judged in the cross. But all of them died and went to heaven before the cross. Right? Abraham, Moses, Isaac, Jacob, David, all of them who trusted in God died and went to heaven before the cross was accomplished. But their sins were judged in the cross as ours will be. So every sin from Adam until the last saint before the rapture, their sins will be dealt in the cross. That's how wonderful this salvation is. That's why the writer of the Hebrews could say, how then can we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? It's magnificent. They would not have known. Abraham just believed that it was counted unto him for righteousness. But there was no atonement at that time for his sin. It eventually happened, as what we have in Galatians 4:3. But when the what? When the fullness of time was come. You see, God had planned a specific time, unbeknownst to any human being, because this was designed from eternity past. Men could not understand God's plan. He had a time when sin will be forever removed, both of Adam's and the saints of today. And that's when it happened. When the fullness of time was come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, so that we could have the adoption of son. No one can question God's timepiece. You say, well, why didn't he send him in Abraham's time, or Moses' time, or David's time? Because that was not God's timepiece. His timepiece was when Christ came. That was his perfect timing for sins to be removed for those who would believe in him. And so he goes on and says, even the righteous of God through faith in Jesus Christ, on all who believe. What did Revelation chapter 13 verse 8 tells us about the lamb slain? When did it happen? The lamb slain before the foundation of the world. So Abraham, Moses, Isaac, Jacob, all the Old Testament saints would have been in that number that God says, I want you. I want you. And so everything was done as if it already happened, because that's how God works. It doesn't work on our timepiece. It doesn't work on our thought of him. And so he said, on all who believe would get the perfect righteousness of God, because that's what he requires. He requires nothing less. He requires perfection. But as he presented it, we could not have standing before him because of our condition. So that's why Christ's 33 years of living on earth was just as important as his death. Because how was that important? Because he lived a righteous, obedient life. And that obedient, righteous life was imputed to all those who would believe. Was given to us by faith in Christ, by believing on what he did on the cross. That's how the perfect righteousness, that's how man became acceptable before God. And we could not have no other way to approach God. Man had no other standing before a holy God except through the person of the Lord Jesus Christ. That's why the work of the cross is so important. But what we said before, it was for what? The glory of God. It says that it was given, God sent forth as a what? A propitiation by the blood through faith to demonstrate his righteousness. So God here is telling us the reason why he sent his son. As a propitiation to demonstrate his righteousness. Because nothing in its entirety before really showed that. But the cross will make Christ not only just, but the what? The justifier. Because they were accusing him, and you're not a just God. And you're not merciful if you drown the whole world and save only one family. Where is your mercy? If you destroy 2 twin cities, where is your mercy? If you just killed Uzzah just on the spot like that because he tried to reach out and save the ark, boom, and killed him, where is your mercy? Nadab and Abihu went in and just offered up something strange, and they died right in there. Where is your mercy? And on the flip side, when he showed mercy to the unjust, they said, how can you do that and say you're righteous? How could you do that? And because God is perfect in all his ways, both in his justice and his mercy, there's only one way that would fulfill that character of God, and it's the cross. The cross accomplished both of those things because it provided mercy and it satisfied his righteous justice on sin. So it was just as important to God as it is to us. It was a demonstration of his righteousness that was imputed to us. It's magnificent, dear saints. It's for his glory. There's a song by Tasha Cobb that says, for your glory, I will do anything just to see you and be where you are. I want to be where you are. Everything is for the glory of God. You know, we sing from our songbook. From verse, I think it's the second verse of 418. For thine own glory and for his made life the beloved one. Isn't that magnificent? Sometimes when we sing these things, So, Brother Junior always tells us that we should have the Selah moment. And I think we should before we go to the next song. Because when you sing those verses, just stop us in our tracks. When Brother Brian was here the last time, he prayed in his prayer, and I'll never forget it because it took me to another phase. He said, your sacrifice was first for God and then for us. We often concentrate on what the cross means to us, but never as much as what it means to God. Because his righteous, holy character was impugned, and the cross was going to satisfy that. And in that process, salvation is provided for you and for me. When we can appreciate that the holy God was appeased, that he was placated, that's what the word propitiation means. It means to satisfy. That the sacrificial death of Christ satisfied God. And when we look at the sacrificial system, we look at the burnt offering. There are elements of the burnt offering that were existent in the trespass and the sin offering. But there was one thing in the burnt that none of the others had, that everything went to God. And that's what depicts the atoning work of Christ. And it was to him a sweet smelling savor. The sacrifice of Christ pleased God. And that's why we have prophetically in Isaiah 53:10, yet it pleased the Father to bruise him. It pleased Jehovah, it pleased Yahweh to bruise Christ. When we can understand these things, when we can understand what the cross meant to God, we will appreciate how much it should mean to us. This lostness that the world was in, when all have sinned, when there's none righteous, when the motive was that there's no fear of God, when their mouth was an open sepulchre, the conversation was nasty, as I prophesied and said, our lips defile us. I'm a man of unclean lips, and I live amongst a people of unclean lips. I don't deserve your mercy. And so he pronounced the woe of weal on himself. Woe is me, he said. I don't deserve to be here. All I see is glory. Look at the seraphim shouting, glory, glory. The whole world is full of his glory. I don't belong here. This is a different sphere. So he had to pronounce the woe on himself because he was unclean. And so the lip had to be scorched. And it was not for punishment. It was a purifying work. Because blessed are the pure in heart, for they what? See God. That's what God demands. He demands purity. He demands perfection. But we can't on our own. That's why the perfect righteousness of God must be imputed to me. That's the only way I could praise God. That's the only way I could stand before God. Not in my own self. I sin every day. Listen, you can't lose your salvation if you're saved. And I tell you what, if you could, we'll all lose it because we sin every day. So the sanctifying work of Christ in the cross makes us acceptable to him. The cross, dear ones, is precious. It's precious. It's give us standing, give us the ability to stand before a sin-hating and a holy. This is a holy God that we have that cannot tolerate anything less than the perfect righteousness that he demands. Because Paul says the futility of human effort cannot come before God. He pronounced the case and said, guilty. But now the righteousness of God is here. And he sent his son so that he could be the Savior of those who will believe. So he says, in his forbearance, God had passed over the sins that were previously committed. And it tells us, verse 26 again, to demonstrate in this time his righteousness. When we sing the hymn 390, the perfect righteousness of God is witnessed in the Savior's blood. That's where it all begins and ends, by the way. It's in the cross of Christ. It is there we see who the blessed Savior are. The cross of Christ. And so they accused God. Right throughout the Old Testament, they accused him. You're not merciful enough. You're not just enough. You're not this. And so the cross that shows everyone. And that's why Paul would say before Agrippa, I know you believe, King. You're a Gentile, but I know you believe. Why? Why did he say that to him? Because he said this thing was not done in a corner. It wasn't a hidden thing, the cross. It was for all to see. And I love the Gospels account. It makes sure that everyone would see. It says, and the people what? Stood beholding. And another account said, and sitting down, they watched him there. The Bible makes it clear that it was seen, that God was demonstrating. What did the Gentile, this Roman centurion say? Truly this was a what? A righteous man. That's what was there. The cross was for the glory of God. In John chapter 12, verse 27 and 28, what did Jesus say? The hour is come. What am I going to say? Father, save me from this hour. For this cause I came into the world. So glorify thy name, he says. What hour was he talking about? The hour of the cross. That was going to bring God glory. But what was the voice that came back saying? I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again. That's what he says. Then chapter 17, verse 4 and 5, he tells the same thing. He talks about his past glory that he had with him before the world was. And he said, I have glorified you on the earth, his glory in the life that he lived for 33 years. And he said, but now glorify the Son. So the glory that will be achieved at the work of the cross is all for the glory of God. And the Son says, the hour is now, where I want your glory to be seen, because we all fall short of it. That's what verse 23 of this chapter says, 23. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Because what is the chief end of man? What is the chief end of man? It's to glorify God. And if we fall short of that, then how are we going to stand before God? So he had to introduce his righteousness, and he did in the most magnanimous of ways, the cross of Christ. And so Paul says, no, the righteousness of God is here in the person of Jesus Christ. It's made manifest in his person. The cross is magnificent, dear ones. It's the only way. Only way. Now, when he says, I am the way, he's not talking about just his person. It's about his work. The work that provided atonement for our sin. So he says, that's the only way to God. There's no other way. And so, he says then, if that's the case, verse 27, then where is your boasting? If human effort is taken out of the equation, where is your boast? Paul says in Galatians, forbid it that I should boast, except what? In the cross of Christ. Is God. That's what our song said, forbid it, Lord, that I should boast in anything else but the cross. So the human effort is taken out, and so God introduced his own righteousness to take us away from any human accomplishment. This was God in his love. This was God in his mercy. This was God in his righteousness, given to us that we could not give ourselves. It's all about God. And it was for what? It was for what? In Ephesians chapter 1, to be what? The praise of his glory. Of his glory. So when David says, look, the whole earth and creation declare the glory of God. Because if you can, it's okay. Because God's creation will. God's creation will. Everything is for the glory of God. Something that we fell short of. But in his love, in his mercy, he gave us the ability to give us standing and a right to and access to God in the cross of Christ. And my question to you today is, what will you do with the work of Christ on the cross? That's the question. Because he provides a remedy for that. You know, a judge would be unjust. If a person is guilty of all the charge, and he said, you know what, go free. And the judge said, you know, you're okay, you go free. Life sentence. And we didn't have any alibi either. You know, sometimes the defendant said, well, I didn't do it because my alibi, I was there, and I have this friend that could prove that I was there. But in our case, there's no alibi. Why? Because God says, I know the heart. So you can say, okay, you were there and you wasn't doing any good. But God sees the heart, right? That's what he says. Men see everything outside, but God sees the heart. And what does Jeremiah tell us about the heart? It is what? It is deceitful. And it is desperately wicked. Above what? Yeah, not some things. Above all things. So God sees no alibi. No alibi. It's just guilt. But he said, I have a way to remove that guilt. Can you imagine, though, that you have a life sentence? You're in a court today, and you commit that heinous crime, and you have a million life sentences. That this guy that getting, who's this guy in the judicial scene recently? That's going to be getting life sentence upon life sentence. Yeah. Who was it there, Zach? Anyone. But, yeah. Yes, thank you. And then the charge come down, or the verdict came down and said, you know what? The slate is wiped clean. Wiped clean. Not only that you are going free, but is that the slate is wiped clean. It's as if you did not commit the crime. Can you imagine that? That's what we got from our God. It's not perfect righteousness. And the slate wiped clean. And we can come in the holy presence of God like we did today, with hearts, minds, and conscience set free. And we can worship Him, and we could say amen. We could say that, dear ones. We couldn't on our own, could we? No. As we leave through those doors in our minds, wondering all those, we couldn't. But the perfect righteousness of God is witnessed in the Savior's blood, has been attributed to me, been credited to my account. And so I'm building a heavy bank account up here, dear ones. And all of you who put your faith and trust in Him. Yes. So we get it not because of our works. Our works is a product of what He has done for us. Because Paul tells us in Ephesians chapter 2 that not of works that any man should boast, right? And he tells us also in Titus that we should be a people desirous of good works. But we are not saved by it. It's just a product of what God has brought us into. It's wonderful. And so, this magnum opus that Paul has, which is the book of Romans, let us just go through it and bruise our knees every time. This is so precious because it tells us of our nothingness and then it gives us what we now have and enjoy in the person of the Lord Jesus Christ. And so, when it comes to chapter 11, verse 36, when he's giving his doxology, could someone read that verse to me, please? Verse 36 of chapter 11. He gives the whole case. He provides the fact that man is guilty. Then he provides the fact that you can be redeemed, you can be justified, you can be sanctified. And then now all glory goes to Him. Can someone read verse 36 of chapter 11 for me? Of Romans.
For of Him, and through Him, and to Him are all things, to whom be glory forever. Amen.
Can everyone say amen to that?
Amen.
Thank you. Of Him, to Him, by Him are all things for His glory. Everything is for His glory. So next time, Brother James, I want you to sing that Tasha Cobb song. For your glory. For the glory of God. It's magnificent, dear ones. Everything is for His glory. The cross is for His glory. And in it provides the redemption for our lost souls. But God was appeased. His throne was vindicated. He was placated. It was propitiated. He was satisfied in the sacrifice of Christ. And we are satisfied as well, right? Yes, we are. So, dear ones, I trust that even though 2 weeks ago you hear the bad news, that it's a guilty verdict. And it looked as if there's no way out, because there was not even no defense. The prosecution presented the case, and the guilty verdict came down. So how am I going to escape? How shall we escape? But then the salvation came in the form of this work by the Lord Jesus Christ. And He's offering it to remove that guilty verdict that will send you to where? To hell. You know, hell is not really preached a lot about these days. Why not? And yet still it's mentioned more in the Bible than heaven. Because God doesn't want anyone to go there. That's the purpose of the cross. Right? But the remedy for the lost condition and the guilty verdict that will wipe your slate clean is here in the cross of Christ. What say you? What say you here today if you're in that condition? Will you still have that guilty verdict over your head until it becomes a reality and you send into a priceless eternity? I trust that it will not be, but that you recognize that. What's the verse said? Greater love hath no man than this. That's what we had today. hearing his love, and all these things that demonstrate the love of God in sending his Son for your soul and for mine. I trust that you will not let this day pass without recognizing, if you are here in your sin, that you're heading for a priceless eternity, where the cross is here to give you relief. And I trust that you will accept him in your heart as your Lord and Savior before it is eternal to you. May it be so for his name's sake. Amen.
With God his glory for the things he has done in the Sunday night symbol.
Go Father, indeed thou hast done great things for thy own delight, for thy own pleasure. We thank thee today that we could be reminded of the greatness of the work of the Lord Jesus. That what he has done is fully accepted as full payment. On the basis of that work, there can be forgiveness of sin. And at this moment in time, we pray that if there be any here present who have not yet come into the goodness or the good of the work of Christ, that they will make it right with God. We thank thee, our God and Father, for such a great work. A work that is satisfying to thy heart. That on the basis of that work, Christ can sit down at thy right hand in perpetuity, no more to repeat this work, no more to rise to repeat this work. But we thank thee, O God and Father, that we can rest with full assurance and confidence that this work has taken care of all of our needs. We give thee thanks, O God and Father, for the great work that thou hast done in the person of thy Son. We bless thee, O God and Father, for the speaker. We pray that thou wilt continue to encourage him, thou wilt continue to enlarge his border, that indeed he might be able to refresh the bowels of the saints. We give thee thanks also for what has been prepared. We bless thee, O God and Father. We receive it from your hands with thanksgiving, giving thee thanks and praise in Jesus' precious name.
Amen.
Okay, we'll ask the visitors to go down first. Hold on. Listen, the elderly saints next. Children with parents with young people going after that. All the people, listen carefully, who said the words today will follow. Okay? After that, the rest of the people go down orderly. I know who said the words today.
Hey, elderly.